The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, watched her youngest son Prince Louis play in the palace gardens. At 9 years old, Louis had inherited his father's gentle spirit and his mother's infectious smile. His laughter echoed through the carefully manicured grounds as he chased butterflies near the rose bushes, completely unaware of the storm brewing within the palace walls. Inside the grand corridors, Prince William paced restlessly in his private study, his jaw clenched with barely contained fury. The morning newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, their headlines screaming accusations that made his blood boil. But it wasn't the press that had triggered this rage, it was something far more personal and devastating. The previous evening had started like any other family gathering. Queen Camilla had arrived at Kensington Palace with her daughter Laura and granddaughter Eliza, now 15 and navigating the complex world of teenage emotions. What should have been a pleasant family dinner had turned into a nightmare that William couldn't shake from his mind. Eliza, with her sharp tongue and apparent resentment toward the younger royals, had cornered Louis in the palace library. What transpired there would forever change the dynamics of the royal family. Catherine had found Louis crying behind the ancient oak shelves, his small frame trembling with confusion and hurt. Through broken sobs, Louis had told his mother about Eliza's cruel words. She had called him worthless, telling him that he would never be important like his older siblings Prince George and Princess Charlotte. But the worst part was what came next. Eliza had physically pushed the young prince, causing him to fall and scrape his knee on the marble floor. She said, "Nobody cares about me because I'm just the spare," Louis had whispered to his mother, his innocent eyes filled with tears. "She said I should disappear so the real royals can be happy." Catherine's heart had shattered hearing those words from her baby. She had gathered Louis in her arms, whispering reassurances while her own anger built like a volcano ready to erupt. When she relayed the incident to William later that night, his reaction was immediate and fierce. "How dare she?" William had thundered, his voice echoing through their private chambers. "How dare she lay a hand on my son and poison his mind with such venom?" The Prince of Wales had barely slept that night, his mind racing with thoughts of protection and justice. Louis was not just his youngest child, he was a vulnerable little boy who deserved to feel safe and loved within his own family circle. The fact that this attack had come from someone within their extended family made it all the more unforgivable. As dawn broke, William had made his decision. He contacted his father King Charles immediately, requesting an urgent private audience. The conversation that followed was tense and emotional, with William demanding immediate action against those who had hurt his son. "This cannot stand, Father," William had said, his voice steady but his eyes blazing with determination. "If we allow this behavior to continue, what message does that send to Louis? What message does it send to the world about how we protect our own children?" King Charles, caught between his loyalty to his wife Camilla and his duty to protect his grandson, found himself in an impossible position. He loved Camilla deeply, but he also understood a father's instinct to protect his child. The weight of the crown seemed heavier than ever as he contemplated the difficult decisions ahead. Meanwhile, Camilla was dealing with her own family crisis. When confronted about Eliza's behavior, her daughter Laura had become defensive, claiming that the children were just playing and that William was overreacting. This response only fueled William's anger further, as it showed a complete lack of understanding about the severity of the situation. "Playing?" William had repeated incredulously when informed of Laura's response. "Pushing a 9-year-old child and telling him he's worthless is not playing. This is bullying, plain and simple." The palace staff could feel the tension in the air. Servants whispered in hallways about the unprecedented family meeting that had been called. Private secretaries worked overtime to manage the potential media fallout, while security teams quietly increased protection around the younger royals. Catherine spent extra time with Louis that morning, reassuring him that he was loved and important. She read him his favorite stories and made his favorite breakfast, trying to restore some normalcy to his world. But she could see the damage in his eyes, a new wariness that broke her heart. "Am I really just the spare, Mummy?" Louis had asked quietly over his cereal, the words cutting through Catherine like a knife. "Never," she had replied firmly, taking his small hands in hers. "You are precious and important, and you have your own special place in this family and in the world." As the morning progressed, William prepared for what would be one of the most difficult conversations of his life. He knew that his next actions would have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy, but his primary concern was simple: protecting his son and ensuring that such cruelty never happened again. The decision he was contemplating was unprecedented in modern royal history, but William felt he had no choice. If traditional family dynamics couldn't protect Louis, then perhaps it was time for more drastic measures. The future of the monarchy might depend on showing that even royal children deserve to feel safe and valued. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the House of Windsor. As William prepared to enter his father's study for their scheduled meeting, he carried with him not just the authority of his future crown, but the righteous anger of a father whose child had been hurt. The morning that had started with Louis's innocent laughter in the garden was about to become a turning point in royal history. William's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, knowing that what happened next would change everything for his family, and possibly for the monarchy itself. In the distance, the bells of St. George's Chapel began to chime, their solemn toll seeming to herald the difficult decisions that lay ahead. The House of Windsor was about to face its greatest internal crisis in decades, all because of the tears of a 9-year-old boy who just wanted to feel loved and safe in his own home. The ornate doors of King Charles's private study opened with a heavy creak that seemed to echo the weight of the moment. William entered to find his father standing by the tall windows, gazing out at the grounds where Louis had played so innocently just hours before. The king's shoulders appeared burdened, and William could see the conflict written across his weathered face. "Father," William began, his voice controlled but firm. "We need to discuss what happened to Louis, and we need to discuss consequences." Charles turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the pain of a grandfather who had failed to protect his grandson. "William, I understand you're upset, but we must handle this delicately. Camilla is devastated about what happened." "Devastated?" William's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "Father, your grandson was physically assaulted and emotionally traumatized by someone we're supposed to trust. Where was this devastation when Louis was crying in his mother's arms?" The conversation that followed was unlike any the father and son had shared before. William laid out his demands with military precision. Eliza would be banned from all royal events and properties indefinitely. Laura would publicly apologize for her daughter's actions. Most importantly, there would be real consequences that showed the world, and Louis, that such behavior was completely unacceptable. King Charles found himself torn between his roles as monarch, father, and husband. His love for Camilla ran deep, but the image of his grandson's tear-stained face haunted him. "What exactly are you proposing, William?" "I'm proposing that we strip Eliza of any informal royal recognition she may have enjoyed through her connection to Camilla. No more royal events, no more palace visits, no more benefits that come with being part of this family," William stated firmly. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Camilla sat with her daughter Laura, both women struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the situation they now faced. Laura's defense of her daughter had crumbled as the full extent of Eliza's actions became clear through palace security footage that had captured audio of the incident. "She called him worthless, mother," Camilla whispered, her face pale with shock. "She physically hurt a child. How did we not see this coming?" Laura's own anger at her daughter was beginning to surface. "I thought she was just going through teenage rebellion. I had no idea she harbored such resentment toward the children." The truth was that Eliza had been struggling with her place in the royal family structure for months. As Camilla's step-granddaughter through marriage, she felt caught between worlds, not quite royal but expected to behave as if she were. Her jealousy toward Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and especially Prince Louis had been growing, fed by comments from classmates and a media that often highlighted her ambiguous position. But understanding the root cause didn't excuse the cruelty she had shown to an innocent child. Back in the king's study, William was presenting a detailed account of how this incident fit into a pattern of problematic behavior that had been overlooked for too long. "This isn't the first time, Father. Catherine has mentioned several uncomfortable interactions at family gatherings. We've been making excuses, hoping Eliza would mature, but yesterday she crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." Charles listened as William described previous incidents, Eliza making cutting remarks about the younger children's privileges, her obvious resentment during family photos, and her general attitude of entitlement without responsibility. "She's 15, William," Charles said softly. "Shouldn't we consider counseling, perhaps family therapy?" "Of course she needs help," William agreed. "But she also needs to learn that actions have consequences. My son needs to see that his family will protect him, that what happened to him matters." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. A palisade entered with news that would complicate matters further. Several media outlets had somehow gotten wind of a family dispute and were beginning to ask pointed questions about why certain family members had suddenly cancelled their appearances at upcoming royal events. William's jaw tightened. "They know something." "Not everything," Charles replied grimly. "But enough to cause problems." This revelation added urgency to their discussion. Any public scandal needed to be managed carefully, but William was adamant that protecting Louis remained the priority over protecting the royal family's image. At Kensington Palace, Catherine was dealing with her own emotional turmoil. She had called her parents to discuss the situation, needing their perspective as grandparents who had always protected their own children and grandchildren. "You did the right thing telling William immediately," her mother had assured her. "A child's safety and emotional well-being must always come first." Catherine also reached out to Diana's former private secretary, seeking advice on how Diana might have handled such a situation. The response was clear: Diana would have moved heaven and earth to protect her children from any form of cruelty, family or not. Meanwhile, Prince George and Princess Charlotte sensed the tension in their home. George, at 10 years old, was beginning to understand royal dynamics and had noticed his little brother's subdued behavior. Charlotte, ever protective of her siblings, had asked their nanny why everyone seemed upset. The children's awareness added another layer of complexity to the situation. How do you explain to children that sometimes family members can be cruel? How do you protect their innocence while preparing them for the realities of their public lives? As the day progressed, William received a phone call that changed everything. Eliza herself had called, having been coached by her mother to apologize. But the conversation revealed the depth of the problem rather than resolving it. "I'm sorry if Prince Louis got upset," she had said, her tone suggesting she didn't truly understand the gravity of her actions. "I was just trying to help him understand how things really work in this family." William's patience snapped. "Help him understand? You pushed a 9-year-old child and told him he was worthless. You made him question his value and his place in his own family." The conversation ended with Eliza hanging up after William made it clear that a hollow apology wouldn't suffice. Real change in behavior and attitude would be required, along with professional help to address her obvious issues with jealousy and resentment. That evening, as William tucked Louis into bed, his son asked a question that broke his heart: "Daddy, do I really belong in this family?" William sat on the edge of the bed and took his son's small hands. "Louis, you are one of the most important people in my world. You belong here more than anyone because you have the kindest heart I've ever known. What happened yesterday was wrong, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again." "Will Eliza say sorry for real?" Louis asked with the innocent hope that only children possess. "She's going to learn that what she did was wrong," William promised. "And she's going to stay away until she truly understands how to treat people with kindness." As William left his son's room, his resolve crystallized. The next day would bring the most difficult family meeting in years, and he was prepared to take unprecedented action to protect his children. The monarchy had survived many crises, but this one was different. It was personal, it involved an innocent child, and it would require difficult choices about family loyalty versus justice. The House of Windsor was about to discover that when it came to protecting his children, the future king would not compromise, no matter the cost to family harmony or royal tradition. The grand conference room at Buckingham Palace had never felt more suffocating. Heavy burgundy curtains blocked out the afternoon sun, casting the room in shadows that seemed to reflect the mood of its occupants. Around the polished mahogany table sat the key figures who would determine the fate of this family crisis: King Charles at the head, his face grave with the weight of impossible decisions; Prince William to his right, his jaw set with unwavering determination; Queen Camilla across from William, her usual composure cracking under the strain; and Laura, Camilla's daughter, whose defiance had given way to uncomfortable silence. The meeting had been called as an emergency family conference, but everyone present understood it was really a trial. The evidence was undeniable, the witnesses clear, and the verdict would reshape family relationships for years to come. Before we begin, William announced, his voice carrying the authority of his future crown, "I want everyone to understand that this is not a negotiation. My son was hurt, physically and emotionally, by someone we trusted. Today we decide how this family responds to that betrayal." Camilla shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The woman who had weathered decades of public scrutiny and media attacks looked smaller somehow, diminished by the magnitude of what her step-granddaughter had done. "William, we all want what's best for Louis. Eliza made a terrible mistake, but she's still just a child herself." "A child who physically assaulted my 9-year-old son," William replied without hesitation. "A child who told him he was worthless and should disappear." "That's not a mistake, Camilla. That's cruelty with intent." Laura finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spoken with Eliza's therapist. She says that teenagers often act out when they feel insecure about their place in complex family situations." The silence that followed was deafening. William stared at Laura with an expression of complete disbelief before responding with controlled fury. "Are you seriously suggesting that my son should understand and forgive because your daughter has feelings of insecurity? Louis is 9 years old. He trusted Eliza, looked up to her as an older cousin, and she used that trust to hurt him in the most fundamental way possible." King Charles intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. "We're here to find a solution that protects Louis while also acknowledging our family bonds." "William, what specifically do you want to happen?" William reached into his briefcase and withdrew a formal document that he had spent hours preparing with his legal advisors. The sight of official paperwork made everyone in the room realize this was no longer an informal family discussion. Effective immediately, Eliza Parker Bowles will be stripped of all informal royal recognition and privileges. She will not attend any royal events, public or private. She will not have access to any royal properties. Most importantly, she will have no contact with my children until she has completed extensive counseling and demonstrated genuine remorse and changed behavior. Camilla gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "William, you're talking about completely cutting off my granddaughter from this family." "I'm talking about protecting my children," William replied firmly. "And if that means cutting off people who would hurt them, then, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about." Laura's defensive instincts flared. "This is completely unreasonable. Eliza is family, and you're treating her like some kind of criminal. She's struggling with adolescence and family dynamics, not planning international incidents." William's response was swift and devastating. "She put her hands on my child. She made him question his worth and his place in his own family. If that's how she handles her struggles, then she's proven she cannot be trusted around vulnerable family members." The king found himself in the impossible position of mediating between his wife's family and his son's righteous anger. Every instinct as a grandfather supported William's position, but his role as head of the family required him to consider broader implications. "William, I understand your anger, but we need to consider the precedent this sets. How do we handle family conflicts in the future if our response is complete exile?" "We set the precedent that hurting children has consequences," William answered without hesitation. "We show Louis that his safety and emotional well-being matter more than preserving uncomfortable family dynamics." As the conversation continued, it became clear that William had support beyond just his immediate family. Princess Anne had been consulted and had expressed her complete agreement with strong consequences. Prince Edward and Sophie had also been briefed and supported protecting the younger generation at all costs. Catherine's absence from the meeting was intentional. She was home with the children, providing them with stability while their father fought for their protection. But her influence was felt through a letter she had written to King Charles, describing in heartbreaking detail the impact on Louis and her own feelings of betrayal as a mother. "My son asked me if he really belongs in this family," Catherine had written. "No child should ever have to question their worth because someone who should love and protect them decided to tear them down instead. The letter had moved King Charles to tears and strengthened William's position immeasurably. Camilla made one final plea. "Charles, surely there's a middle ground. Perhaps supervised visits, family therapy sessions together." William's response was immediate and final. "There is no middle ground when it comes to my children's safety." Eliza made her choice when she decided to hurt Louis. Now we make ours. The formal vote was hardly necessary. King Charles, torn between love and duty, ultimately sided with protecting his grandson. The decision was unanimous among the senior royals, even though it meant accepting the painful reality that family connections didn't excuse cruel behavior. The document was signed that afternoon, officially severing Eliza's informal connections to royal privileges and access. The decision would be kept private initially, but its effects would be immediate and noticeable. As the meeting concluded, Laura made one last desperate attempt to negotiate. "What about Christmas? Family gatherings? Are you really going to keep a 15-year-old away from her grandmother during the holidays?" William's response was quiet but absolute. She should have thought about that before she decided to hurt a 9-year-old child. Actions have consequences, and this is hers. That evening, as news of the decision spread through palace staff and close family members, the reality of what had transpired began to sink in. A family that had survived scandals, divorces, and public criticism was now dealing with something far more personal and painful: the deliberate cruelty of one child toward another. William returned home to find Louis drawing at the kitchen table, his small face still bearing traces of the sadness that had haunted him since the incident. When Louis looked up at his father with hopeful eyes, William knelt beside him. "Is everything going to be okay, Daddy?" William gathered his youngest son in his arms. "Yes, Louis. Everything is going to be okay. I promised to protect you, and I always keep my promises." But, even as he comforted his son, William knew the hardest part was still to come. The family would have to heal from this trauma while also managing the inevitable media attention that would follow. The decision to take such drastic action had been necessary, but its consequences would ripple through the royal family for years to come. The House of Windsor had faced its greatest internal crisis in decades, and, while justice had been served, the emotional cost would take much longer to calculate. 3 months after the fateful family meeting, the consequences of William's unprecedented decision continued to reverberate through the corridors of power and the quiet moments of family life. The official announcement had been carefully crafted to protect everyone involved while making the boundaries unmistakably clear. The palace press office had released a brief statement about reviewing family protocols to ensure the well-being of all royal children, but those who understood palace language knew exactly what it meant. Prince Louis was slowly healing. The little boy who had once questioned his worth now walked with more confidence, his smile returning gradually as he realized that his father's actions had proven beyond doubt how much he was valued. Catherine had worked tirelessly with child psychologists to help Louis process what had happened, ensuring that this traumatic experience wouldn't define his relationship with family or trust in general. "Daddy really kept his promise," Louis had told his mother just the previous week as they walked through the gardens where this crisis had begun. "Eliza can't hurt me anymore." The simple faith in his father's words broke Catherine's heart and filled it simultaneously. William had indeed kept his promise, but the cost had been higher than anyone had anticipated. Camilla was struggling deeply with the consequences of the decision. The woman who had spent years building relationships within the royal family found herself partially isolated, her own step-granddaughter's actions having created an almost unbridgeable chasm. She had aged visibly in the months since the incident, the stress of losing access to someone she loved while understanding why it was necessary taking its toll. "I keep wondering if I failed her somehow," Camilla confided to Charles during one of their private evening conversations. "If I had seen the signs, been more involved, maybe this never would have happened." Charles held his wife as she grieved, understanding that she was mourning not just the loss of contact with Eliza, but also the loss of innocence about what people were capable of doing to children. "You couldn't have known," he assured her. "Some behaviors can't be predicted or prevented by good intentions." Laura had initially fought the decision through lawyers, claiming that William had overstepped his authority and that the punishment didn't fit the crime. Her legal efforts had been quietly but firmly rebuffed by the royal legal team, who made it clear that William had acted within his rights as both a father and a future king protecting his heir's siblings. The failure of her legal challenge had forced Laura to confront the reality of what her daughter had done. For months, she had minimized the incident, calling it teenage drama and sibling rivalry. But, faced with the unwavering stance of the senior royals and the detailed account of Eliza's actions, she could no longer deny the severity of the situation. Meanwhile, Eliza herself was in intensive therapy, finally, beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had done. Her therapist had explained that her actions weren't just mean teenage behavior, they were calculated emotional and physical abuse of a younger child who had trusted her. The realization had hit Eliza like a physical blow. In therapy sessions, she had broken down completely when forced to confront what Louis must have felt in those moments in the library. The confident, cruel teenager who had pushed a 9-year-old child was slowly being replaced by someone who understood the weight of her choices. "I didn't think about how it would make him feel," she had sobbed to her therapist during one particularly difficult session. "I just wanted him to know that he wasn't more important than me. But I made him feel like he wasn't important at all." Her letter of apology to Louis, written months later, would be one of the most difficult things she had ever attempted. Under therapeutic guidance, she had crafted words that acknowledged not just what she had done, but the impact it had on an innocent child. But William was clear about the conditions for any potential reconciliation. The letter would be reviewed by child psychologists before Louis ever saw it. Any future contact would require extensive professional oversight. And, most importantly, Eliza would need to demonstrate sustained behavioral change over a significant period before even supervised interaction could be considered. The media had eventually picked up on the story, but the palace's careful handling had minimized the damage. Royal correspondents understood that something significant had happened within the family, but the details remained protected. The focus had instead shifted to William's growing reputation as a protective father who put his children's well-being above all other considerations. Public opinion, when it emerged, was overwhelmingly supportive of William's actions. Parents across Britain and the Commonwealth identified with his fierce protection of his child. The story, when it did leak in carefully managed pieces, resonated with anyone who had ever seen their child hurt by someone they trusted. At a children's charity event several months later, William had been approached by a mother whose daughter had been bullied by a family member. "Your Highness," she had said quietly, "thank you for showing that it's okay to put children first, even when it's difficult." That conversation had reinforced for William that his decision, however painful, had sent an important message about protecting vulnerable family members. The relationship between William and Camilla had been strained but was slowly mending. Both understood that they loved the same family, even if they disagreed about how to protect it. Charles had worked carefully to bridge the gap, ensuring that family gatherings could continue while respecting the boundaries that had been established. Christmas had been particularly difficult. Eliza's absence from family celebrations was noticeable, but so was Louis's renewed joy in family gatherings. He played freely with his cousins, laughed without reservation, and showed no signs of the anxiety that had marked his behavior immediately after the incident. The healing process continued as Catherine and William watched their youngest son rediscover his confidence. Louis had started piano lessons and shown a natural talent for music. His teachers remarked on his kind nature and his protective instincts toward younger children. Perhaps his own experience had taught him the importance of kindness. Prince George and Princess Charlotte had been carefully informed about appropriate family boundaries in age-appropriate ways. They understood that sometimes people make serious mistakes and face consequences, and that their parents would always protect them from harm. As spring arrived and the gardens at Kensington Palace bloomed again, William often found himself reflecting on the decisions he had made. The cost had been high: family relationships strained, difficult conversations, ongoing therapy for everyone involved. But, watching Louis play freely in those same gardens where his crisis had begun, William knew he had made the right choice. The final chapter of this family crisis was still being written. Eliza's therapy was ongoing, showing promising progress but requiring continued commitment. The possibility of supervised reconciliation remained distant but not entirely impossible. The family had learned painful lessons about the importance of addressing problematic behavior before it escalated to cruelty. Most importantly, Prince Louis had learned that he was valued, protected, and loved unconditionally. The little boy who had once questioned his place in the family now ran through the palace halls with confidence, secure in the knowledge that his parents would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. The House of Windsor had survived its crisis, scarred but stronger. The precedent had been set that protecting children wasn't just a parental responsibility, it was a royal duty that superseded all other considerations. And, in the end, that was a legacy worth any price.